There are lots of choices when you're trying to find the best web development IDE, and there's lots of people out there with strong opinions on what is the best tool to use. So why don't I start off by choosing my favorite? And for me, it has to be Visual Studio Code. It's really fantastically versatile because not only do I like to code in languages like HTML, CSS, JavaScript, PHP, and other web development languages, but I also like to code in Python and C++, C Sharp. And being able to use one tool for all of these different languages is a fantastic thing for me. So VS Code is incredibly versatile. It's also really lightweight. The fact that it's a lightweight software, which means that it's never going to bog my computer down. And I could be using it on a fairly weak machine and never worry about myself running out of resources to do what I'm trying to do. Another fantastic thing about using VS Code is the rich extension marketplace. So think about extensions like browser plugins. For instance, you're used to installing plugins into your browser that can do helpful things when you're surfing the web. Now, extensions can do the same thing for VS Code. And things like Prettier, for instance, is a very popular extension that we can use for formatting our code, or ESLint for linting our code as we're creating web applications. You can also add things like Live Server for a real-time preview, and even framework-specific tools like React, Vue.js, and Angular can make VS Code really powerful if you're working in JavaScript. And as you know, JavaScript is incredibly popular for web development, especially thanks to things like its popular frameworks. Also, you've got some more customizability built into VS Code. So maybe you want some custom key bindings. This could also let you set up your own theme and customize the actual visual appearance of the environment. So you can get really comfortable having a web development IDE that represents you and what you find important. I should also point out that when it comes to using any IDE, you want to make sure that there is a Git integration, because whenever we're creating any form of software, including web applications, typically we need to include version control. And depending on the stage you are in your web development career, version control will be an important thing that you have to be very comfortable with using. And VS Code, like most IDEs for using web development, has built-in Git support. So I find that really helpful. And you can even add extensions like Git Lens, which make it even easier in VS Code. That being said, there is no one-size-fits-all solution when it comes to picking the best web development IDE. You'll see lots of passionate opinions about what you should be using, but it's really important that you consider the fact that different tools can be better for different use cases and projects. Now, web development is a fairly broad topic, because if I say I'm a web developer, that doesn't really indicate what I develop in. Am I an HTML and JavaScript developer? Am I a Python developer? Am I a PHP developer? What am I using? What do I need to use to get the best out of that project? So choosing the right IDE really depends on the language and the framework and the specific needs of your project. So rather than me just saying, yes, VS Code is the best, you should use it too, let's consider some other options. There might be a better fit if you find yourself regularly coding in a different language, and having a tool that's really well suited to that language might be the right choice. So let's think about that now. Now, JavaScript, TypeScript, these are clearly the powerhouses of modern day web development. Everyone's familiar with JavaScript. It powers, or at least is behind, around 98% of websites on the internet, which is pretty insane when you think about it. So if you want to use JavaScript and TypeScript, and maybe you want to use popular frameworks like React or Vue, I would recommend considering WebStorm from IntelliJ. Now, why would I say that? WebStorm is designed for web development. It is specifically a web development IDE. VS Code is a versatile IDE, but WebStorm is designed for web development. And you get smart coding assistance, real-time error detection, and some really amazing code completion for JavaScript. Also, you get built-in debuggers and test runners for frameworks like Jest and Mocha, so that's also super helpful. And as I mentioned earlier, version control. WebStorm is also well set up for seamless integration with Git, which is likely what you'll be using. So WebStorm is a fantastic one to consider if you want to do development in JavaScript and or TypeScript. Equally, staying on the Storm name themes, there's P from the same company, JetBrains. And this is, as it suggests, really well tailored for PHP developers. So if you're a developer that likes to code in PHP, maybe you like to use certain PHP frameworks like Laravel, Symfony, or Drupal. Maybe you are someone that's creating WordPress plugins, or you're a WordPress expert and you're always working in some form of PHP. PHPStorm might be the greatest choice for you rather than just going to something generic like VS Code. Again, you've got all this advanced analysis and refactoring tools that are tailored for PHP built into the software, so you know you can rely upon that. And it's also really great for working with databases because most modern web applications and web developers have to be ready to integrate with databases because most websites in some form or another, certainly more complicated websites and web applications, rely upon a backend to set up information for dynamic content. So built-in tools to manage SQL and NoSQL databases within PHPStorm make it a really good consideration. And again, you'll get version control with Git like you would expect with any modern IDE. Something else that should really be pointed out is that nearly all web developers will have to use HTML and CSS. Now, even if you're coding in PHP, there's a chance you can use HTML and CSS as well. And if you're coding in JavaScript, you can have to use HTML and CSS as well. So all of these tools that I'm mentioning are clearly going to be well tailored for using HTML and CSS alongside your preferred language. So you don't have to be worried that if I go down the route of PHPStorm, it's only good for PHP. No, it'll be great with HTML, CSS, and even JavaScript as well. And the same goes with if you use WebStorm. Now, what about if you want to consider something more along the lines of full stack web development, or maybe even Java-based web development? In that case, maybe you're already a Java developer or you're dabbling in some form of web application development. I'd recommend considering something like IntelliJ IDEA. Now, this is again from JetBrains, but it's a super powerful option, and it's got lots of advanced features for Java and Java Spring and other JVM-based languages, including Kotlin. And it's got incredible tools for maintaining the quality of your code. And it's also got some excellent refactoring support. Now, this is maybe more specialist depending on your own use case. A lot of web developers may be just sticking to the mean and the MERN stacks, or maybe you're using PHP. So maybe IntelliJ IDEA isn't the greatest choice if that's where you want to be. But perhaps you've already been in Java development and you're coming over to web development, or you're creating some form of Java-based web applications. In that case, I'd highly recommend considering IntelliJ IDEA. Something that I haven't mentioned so far is the idea of an online-based development environment. You don't have to use a local piece of software on your machine. So what do I mean by that? Let's dive into that a little bit more now. For instance, you may have heard about AWS Cloud9. This is an online IDE, which means that you run the IDE in your browser, and you can imagine it's the same experience that you would get with VS Code or WebStorm or PHPStorm or even IntelliJ IDEA, but it's going to be all within the browser, which means you don't have to install anything on your machine. So you can do it all in the comfort of your own browser. And the experience will be very similar to what you would expect from a standard IDE. Equally, there are other tools. Even on Hackr.io, we have our own online development environments, our own compilers for HTML and for JavaScript and even for Python. And with our HTML and JavaScript online compilers, what I think is great about those, like with most online compilers, is that you can code on one side of the window, and on the other side, you can see your output in real time, which means you can stay in a single window, do your coding, and see the output of your web development project directly in the browser that you're coding in. And I think for beginners or even for people that want to quickly test certain ideas, that can be a really fantastic tool to have at your disposal, because it means that you can stay within the browser. You haven't got to flip between one piece of software and the browser to check the output. You haven't got to run anything. You can just literally use the website, go to the compiler, type in your code, and see it output side by side with your code, which I think is a really good way for very quickly prototyping and for also working on projects or working on new tutorials or working on anything. If you're a web development learner in particular, it's a great way to get real-time feedback and to ensure that what you're doing is outputting the way you would expect it to. So I would highly recommend considering real-time output options like online compilers, much like we have on Hackr.io, if you are in web development and you want to experiment with the idea of something other than an inbuilt piece of software on your own machine. Now, to wrap it up, let's take a moment to talk about AI. AI is obviously everywhere. We are familiar that it is essentially infiltrating nearly every marketplace in every sector. When it comes to coding, one of the most important use cases for AI is an AI coding assistant or an AI paired programmer. Some of the most popular versions are GitHub Copilot, Amazon Code Whisperer. JetBrains have that built in with their IntelliJ product and their other products. But you have a range of choices, including Tab9. What I would recommend to you is that when you're choosing an IDE for web development, if you're serious about becoming a web developer, it's important to consider one that is already ready to go with these AI development tools, because the way that the future is going, it seems incredibly likely that we'll all be using them on a daily basis. We'll all become 10x developers, but we'll be doing that by utilizing an AI coding system to help us do some of the boilerplate and some of the more labor-intensive, less adventurous or creative tasks. And one of the great things about AI coding systems is this is where they can thrive. They can do some really simple things really fast for us, enable us to work on some of the more advanced and complicated things that developers and human developers are still really important for. So the point here is AI development tools and AI coding assistants can be super helpful for web developers. And as I believe that's where the future is going, it'd be a wise idea to consider investing your time learning how to use a web development IDE that is ready to go with these tools. That way you don't have to drop the IDE you're so comfortable with in the future and jump onto something new because you need to use an AI coding assistant. So I think that's a nice way to be future ready and to be smart about where things are going with the field of web development. Now, to wrap things up, I think some of the other things to point out, that depending on your own working environment, maybe you're a solopreneur or you're a freelance web developer, of course, you have complete control over the IDE you use. But if you work for a company, they may have their own preferences on what you use. Maybe they've already paid for certain licenses, or they have certain formatting systems, other collaboration requirements that mean that you should use a particular IDE that fits. In that case, obviously, you have a bit less choice, but you can always raise your own ideas about what you think would be a good IDE for the team to use based upon some of these suggestions. Overall, though, I recommend trying out a few, seeing which one best fits your workflow depending on the language that you're using the most, and ultimately try and make it an environment that makes you feel comfortable and excited to do your coding and your web development projects. So thanks so much for watching this video. Hope you enjoyed this, and hope to see you in the next one.